This is going to be a bit different. My energy levels are uncharacteristically low for a video moment, but I have to do this now. I tried doing it during the day, but I couldn't get the segues right. I was finished talking about one thing, and then I finished about point A, so now I'm going to move on to point B, and they're connected, but when I have to announce that they're connected, that's not a segue. And I've had one too many LARP segues when I'm just on my own thinking about things, and it's like, well, no, I can't do a video. I can't do a video where it's an unsmooth transition from one thing to another, even though the things are always somewhat connected. So this is in part going to be an addendum to the gender video. It's October 27th now. I haven't even begun entering all the visuals for the audio portions of that last video, so I don't know when any of this is going to be done. I dread working on that video anymore now that all the recordings are done, just because there's so much audio in it. So I need to work on what to put as the visuals for the audio parts, because that's the only way the video is going to work, is if I flash the evidence as I'm complaining about the issues, the social evidence, let's say, the armchair evidence. And so I couldn't do the segues properly. It just didn't flow. And I'm hoping it'll flow now, but I am just drained. I woke up less than half an hour ago, but it's nice and peaceful. It was just so noisy, even at my place when I was recording that stuff. But I need to do this addendum. I need to talk about a few other things. I have a lot of things I want to hit on really quickly in this video, so this is probably also going to be a failure. But just so you know, it's going to be an exception. I'm not going to do videos when I'm low energy. This just has to be the one exception because I'm not going to have time to do it later today. I just want to remark briefly, and see, even this, just saying what I said a second ago and then just saying I want to remark briefly, that's not a good segue. I'm too hard on myself, because I just see so much. Video making should be almost artistic. It's like a quasi-artistic thing, and I don't want to resemble the people who just do it in a drabby way. I don't want to resemble them even one iota. And if I just transition to the next thing now, it just seems like it's just too formulaic. But anyway, I do have to remark on just how baffled I am. I'm baffled on loop. So this is kind of a redundant complaint, but it just got worse seemingly in the last week. The fact that so many, I'm going to say, wise people are remarking on Kanye West's socio-political commentary without saying, like, even I'm just feeling disgusted at myself now for uttering Kanye West's name. But you listen to Sam Harris talked about it critically and seriously, as if this is something to even engage without even saying that. The only way you should engage any of this stuff is by saying that this is a clown. And the real story about this thing is the fact that the clown says something, and the whole internet, or a good chunk of the internet that I pay attention to, can't just ignore it. The same could be said for Elon. The same could be said for a lot of people. These are they're not even amateurs. They're not even novices. In Elon's case, it's just part opportunism. In Kanye's case, if I'm going to be ableist, it's definitely the bipolar thing is an aspect of it. But even if he didn't have the bipolar, he's just never said anything the least bit informative or insightful. And so it's an old complaint of mine, but I'm going to make it again because this last week has been really bad, with just so many people treating Kanye as a commentator that is even capable of climbing into the ring. The only time you say something about him is that he hasn't even stepped into the arena. He's in some different arena, and he thinks he's contributing to the arena he needs to contribute to, the serious, reasoned arena. And when people complain about him, they're complaining about the specific things he said. But it's just, the biggest issue is that just more and more I'm seeing it. The biggest issue is that the more low resolution your views are, the more people you're going to have paying attention to, the more traction you're going to get, and the higher resolution your views and perspectives are, the more you're going to be ignored. So it's just I'm just baffled on loop. I can't stop complaining about this. I just cannot believe that this many people feel that this is something that, I guess because he has his fans still, the serious people feel the need to respond to him. But to me, it's just on par with any of the others. Just the legion of things that entertainers and comedians do and say that does get a lot of traction that people don't feel the need to respond to, like serious people. But for some reason, Kanye, I guess because it was anti-Semitism, that made it go over the rails. But I'm just sick. I'm gonna have to do something. I'm gonna have to unalgorithmicize my internet in some way. Clicking do not recommend, clicking block, clicking all these things that the algorithm feeds me. It just doesn't do it. They keep coming back. I shouldn't know who any of these people are. I shouldn't know who Kanye West is. I shouldn't know who Jennifer Aniston is. I shouldn't know who Kim Kardashian is. I shouldn't know any of these people that the algorithm insists I need to know. Like, I think just in the last 2 days, I've clicked do not recommend on double-digit number of articles insisting that I read about Matthew Perry's drug addiction and how he spent $10 million on rehab. If there were any semblance of justice in the universe, these people would get me or someone who's even better than me bombarding them in their algorithms. Probably people who are much better than me, let's say, and more professional and more composed, and I guess who've written books and organized their thoughts really well. That's what would happen. But so I just want to throw this out there. Does anyone actually still believe that the reason we are nowhere near the reason we're on this epistemic downfall is primarily due to censorship? Does anyone actually still believe that censorship is the biggest contributor to us not being in a, let's say, civil or intellectual meritocracy in the public square? This is something I've written about at length in my post, Dissident Speech and Freedom of Reach, but I've never really ranted about it in a video, so I just have to do it. I have to do it just briefly now, as low as my energy levels are. It's never been this obvious that censorship, though it is always annoying, and you should understand it as annoying from just a first-person perspective. If you have something of yours that you worked on and it gets taken down, I ranted about that enough. You'll hear that before you'll hear me say anything in this video, because I'm going to upload the previous video first, because yes, this is an addendum to that. I'll get to all that stuff momentarily, hopefully. But as annoying as censorship is, just personally, because you put in some work and then it gets removed, you often don't get a proper explanation as to why. Though nowadays I can see how, if that last video does get removed, they can just cite to the TOS, because the TOS is that absurd. So I find censorship and corporate censorship, this is not just First Amendment style approach to censorship. We can have a wide view of censorship, and in each single case we can morally condemn it without feeling the need to think that we can use anything in the legal sphere to correct for that, at least for those corporate forms of censorship. Like, I'm not even making that case. This could just be the problem that's just insoluble social media style corporate censorship. I have no strong views as to whether the government should get involved to resolve any of this stuff. The problem is, as is the case with the previous video, it should not be something that should have even manifested. It should not be. There shouldn't be nearly as many people who agitated for a terms of service this babyish in the first place. When there's that many people who are content with it, the government swooping in and fixing it, no. It needs to be more of a bottom-up approach for the resolution, to really be a resolution that is fitting, attitudinally fitting. If we are actually going to march towards something that is even halfway to intellectual meritocracy, it can't be top-down solutions where some non-trivial number of people actually felt that no, these terms of service actually do protect all the people who need protecting, and the fact that we're not going to know what someone like me spouts, that's okay, because it's more important to keep people protected and in the dark about certain uncomfortable truths, uncomfortable observations. Maybe truths is me getting ahead of myself. So we could I could just talk for hours on end about how I subjectively find it annoying that the terms of service on at least every single popular platform are what they are. Parler and Gab, they have their own censorship. There's people who have been removed for, obviously it's always going to be something different, but it's just whatever the taboos and the tripwires are in those spheres, that's just going to be the censorship, and it doesn't exist in as high droves as it does on YouTube and Twitter, but it still exists. It's just that obviously there'll be less people there who are going to be willing to trip those kinds of tripwires and taboos. Here I'm talking about Gab and Parler in particular. So that's why you see less of it. Like progs aren't going to go there quite like people who are in some sense opposed to what is now conventionally accepted on YouTube and not accepted are going to try to stick to YouTube. So that's why YouTube's always going to see more censorship. It housed way more people to begin with than did Gab and Parler and all these other reactionary alternatives that are just, you're just going to have to comport yourself to those sensibilities if you go there, but you're still going to have to comport yourself, and no one gets that. But my bigger complaint is not even that. It's the fact that there's still a lot of people who seem to think that like censorship is coextensive with epistemic dystopia. They won't use that word. That's my word. That's the word I used in my lengthy blog post on this. Or that a society without any censorship is going to be the society that actually has the true intellectual meritocracy. Right? And so that to me just shows that you don't spend nearly enough time exploring arguments. Because if you spend even, I think I'm going to say 1/30th of the amount of time exploring as I do, you'll soon come to realize that the reason things are as bad as they are is because the most low resolution people, censorship or not, the most low resolution people are increasingly, this has always been a problem, but it's now an increasing problem. The most low resolution people are the ones getting all the traction. And the higher resolution you are, the less traction you get. I cannot tell you how many times I've been blown away by something and I've learned something by someone who's just completely ignored and never brought up in any of these, I guess, national and international debates. Just the names who really do hit it out of the ballpark are not the names that maybe not even any of you are going to recognize. Because I often drop some of these names, but I don't get any indication from the commenters that the links have been followed or any of that stuff. But that's really what you're going to need to do. You're going to need to follow these links that I know I load my low bar with a lot of links, and those links contain works of these people that I think are the ones who should have name recognition. Not ass woman. I said Kim Kardashian, but I should have just said ass woman. That's it's the biggest offender, really. I cannot tell you how many times I click do not recommend and the algorithm just insists that this is just something that needs to make its way into my online world. This is why I fled MeetSpace for the online world in the 2000s. I think this is partly what motivated my gender video. It's the misandry at work, and I'm going to talk about that at length, maybe here, maybe in another video. And it's just the fact that the very things that I fled offline are now the things that are just all these people just poured in and seemingly took control of my algorithm. So censorship is not coextensive with epistemic dystopia. You can have more censorship, but a more shrewd population, more shrewd observers who will still get past the censorship and realize that, okay, at least some of the people who are censored we could have learned from, but the majority of the people we could learn from and gain insight from are these people who are heretofore just completely ignored. Examples abound in, I think, over the last 4 years. I think pretty much every single video I loaded with links that are just these papers or essays, or in some cases full ebooks, sometimes audiobooks, sometimes just wiki articles containing research done by people who are very much, who need to be the recognizable names. If I start going into the specifics now, then I'm just going to derail on that, so I'm not going to go into the specifics because this is just its own standalone thing. And so I'm just going to say this right now: if you watch my videos but you never consult the low bar, I have contempt for you as well, and I should be honest about that. If you can watch my video on nuclear agents and binary takes and comment the way SkidRowRadio commented on that video, just like kind of a attack ad style comments, after having heard me say everything I said and clearly not having clicked on any of the links, because he commented. It was over an hour-long video, but he commented, I think, right around the time he would have finished listening, and it was just kind of, if democracy was not a intra-national phenomena, if it was an international or supranational phenomenon, and so there were these kind of international campaign ads, negative attack ads. That's how his comment reads, and it's just, there's no way for anyone to hear how I approached for nearly an hour. The video was over an hour, but in the last few minutes I didn't talk about geostrategic stuff. I just moved on to these local issues and bitched about my folks. But if you can hear everything I said there about how we should do the opposite of having our expressions resemble these attack ads. And attack ads don't have to contain lies or myth truths. They just have to fail to contextualize. And that's what his kind of his punchy comment, it doesn't have to contain lies. It's all failures to contextualize, or failures to grapple with a question like, someone's going to have to be the 800-pound gorilla in the room. And so following 1945, who should have been the 800-pound gorilla in the room? Should it have been Washington? Should it have been Beijing? Should it have been Moscow? Like, somebody would have had to have been that. And the counterfactual, when it was someone other than Washington, we see the counterfactual. We saw the counterfactual in Eastern Europe, right? It was satellite states. Moscow saw to it that Eastern Europe was going to comprise the satellite states to be serviceable to Moscow's interest. That's not what America did. America didn't render Western Europe into just a bunch of colony states the way they really could have, when you realize how ravaged Western Europe was. And the fact that they didn't, that counts for something. That doesn't count for everything, but that's not a fact that should be omitted. And it's just, when you comment in this attack hat sort of way, and I'm just done. I've written things back to him so many times. Maybe I'll respond to the comment in a separate video. I'll read it out, but I'm done writing these long responses, even to a comment of his that's 5 times as short as that one was, because he wrote a lot. So it's like, there's no way I'm gonna tackle this because it's gonna be book length. So yeah, I didn't think I would spiral into complaining about his comment, but maybe at some point I'll read it out. But yeah, sorry Ben, I'm done writing out things to you, because it's just been one too many times, and there's been one too many times where I think you replied back to my long reply to you, but because you do it from your SkidRowRadio account, your reply is just invisible. It might be visible to you, but it's not visible to me. It doesn't even go into my spam folder. It doesn't even show up in any inbox I have. So if you want to do a long form written exchange, like, sometimes your comment just goes invisible. Your comment response to me. Sometimes I get your first comment, but not your response to me. But I see it says 3. Instead of 2, it says 3. So it's like, it must have been you who replied. So consider commenting from some other channel you have that's not in the kind of algorithmic no man's land as your SkidRadio account is. And yeah, I am really disappointed in how you commented on that video. If you truly paid attention, like, I know that you're not on some 5th column shit, but it sounds like you're very influenced by people who you think are just doing the impartial spectator thing. But no, they're on some 3rd world or 5th column shit. And yeah, that's not to call you abuser of those kinds of tactics, but I think you have been abused by those kinds of tactics. If you can listen to everything I said in that video and comment the way you did. And I like the fact that your first word in that comment was perhaps, and that's why I kept reading. But by the 3rd paragraph, I just rage quit. I came back, I read a couple more paragraphs, I had to rage quit again. It's just, this is how I read your comments now. I read them in bursts, in increments, because you're so, it's like you got to step outside yourself. And every time you've looked at a campaign ad that made you like throw up inside a little, figuratively or literally, because of how it failed to contextualize so many things, because it had its sights set on victory, and it knew that enough rubes, my lappy just went off, it knew that enough rubes would be taken in by those punchy tactics. The fact that you can't see that in your own comment got my hopes up when I saw the word perhaps as your first word that you wrote, but that perhaps was just rhetorical. rhetorical and a bit polemical as well. You might be right? Because this goes back to the thing I said of us not being able to house all the information that's necessary, right? It could be that you have housed more information that's pertinent to this, and I have mistaken what's pertinent. Right? It could be that. But that still doesn't justify the polemical approach to how you carry yourself, and not asking the toughest questions. Like, someone will have to be the 800-pound gorilla in the room for the foreseeable future, at least. And if you can't plainly state that it is a false equivalence, and that a 30-70 split might be the right way to look at it, maybe less than 30-70, and that if you had a chance to flip a coin and live where the coin determines whether you live in one of these democracies or one of these autocracies, or you can just choose, you would not flip the coin, you would choose to live in the democracy as opposed to live under an autocrat. Even if the East and West, if you want to split it that way, even if they are equally bad geostrategically and geopolitically, they're clearly not domestically equally bad. If they were, you would just, in reflective equilibrium, it's a 50-50 chance you land on a random democracy or a random autocracy. You toss that coin? I don't think you would. I think you know that the democratic order affords you certain protections that are far less likely to eventuate in the autocratic order. That's the most important thing. But then I would take that to international relations as well, because I do think that the most important fact, maybe there's a more important fact, but the most important fact, according to me, maybe you can correct me on this, the most important fact is what happened 1945 onwards, where you saw Eastern European states rendered into satellite states. You did not see America that had such military power over the rest of the world, but Eastern Europe or Western Europe included. It did not exert that power on them. It rebuilt them. I've made this point to you several years ago. You weren't convinced. So, I don't know. I don't know why I'm bringing it up now, but I just felt that nothing you say to this is going to make me believe that that's not a convincing point, and the most important point. And then all the other stuff I talked about, how, nations aren't fixed. Nations aren't these transcendental entities that are fixed perpetually by their pasts. It's all about the individuals who are in positions of power, and the kind of individuals, the caliber of the population that renders those individuals in power accountable or not, depending on how apathetic or not they are. America, no, that's too blobby. We got to talk about individuals. And the reason I'm not as careful when it comes to Russia on that sort of stuff is because in Russia, it really has been, if we're going to just be blunt and frank, it has been one individual. Maybe informally, we can say it's been just one individual, but formally, yes, he was back in power by 2012, but we know he was in power informally for the better part of the last 23 plus years. Whereas America had different individuals at the helm. So I am a little more monolithic, or a lot more monolithic in terms of my criticisms of Russia, because I do think it always comes down to individuals, and Putin, for all intents and purposes, Putin has been the individual since 1999-2000. Yeah, I don't buy the he self-unseated and then he seated himself back in. I don't buy that. So it's just, when you accept my premise that it's about the individuals, you're going to accept, and any other skeptic of everything I said in that video, nuclear agents with binary takes, where I say we shouldn't do the false equivalence and we should individuate. It's easier to be monolithic with criticisms of Russia, because Russia has just really had, it's a one-man pony show. Okay, I really didn't think I would go off on you because of your comment, and if you feel that I should read out your comment because you're really that interested in what I have to say, we've tussled on these things before, so I don't think you lack that much imagination as to how I might, because there's been so many times on other issues too, I write these long, almost essay-length replies to you, and you don't get anything out of it, so it's like, why would we just raise each other's blood pressure? I don't want to tell you not to comment on my videos, but I think we do just raise each other's blood pressure on almost every single issue. You certainly raise my blood pressure, maybe I don't raise yours, but when I start thinking about how it's possible that I don't raise yours while failing to persuade you on anything, maybe it's because you are doing some fifth column shit and you're not just merely swindled by it. I don't know. I don't want to make bad assumptions. And I don't want to say I know factually more than you. I just think that I'm able to calibrate my contrarianism. You're an uncalibrated contrarian. That's your biggest thing in terms of establishment politics. There's nothing calibrated about, and certainly the kind of facts that I think are more important than others. I think I'm better at prioritizing what facts we ought to emphasize, certainly in this epoch. I didn't think I'd go off on you, but I did, so yeah, my energy levels, I'm gonna have to stop and continue, both because I'm at the mercy of the camcorder again, and because I just gotta regroup. But yeah, if you insist, I can read out your comment and do the kind of response that I did to what's his name, Naturalist Ted, in that video where he wrote a few paragraphs. It was just over an hour for his short comment. That's why I hesitate doing it. Your comment's long. If my video was over an hour and Ted only had like 4 paragraphs, I don't want to do like a 3-hour video. But if I'm going to engage your comment properly, that's what it's going to be, because I always want to contextualize further what I believe, and that takes time. And I don't think that's time you need to spare to listening to me, because if I were going to be convincing to you, I would have already been convincing in the video you commented on if you had heard me out fully. It was almost an hour on geopolitics. And just also human psychology. A lot of this entails knowledge of psychology, not just the legalistic thing. That's why I coined the term in the low bar, if anyone had read it. I referred to the kind of let's count international violations and apportion all of our blame to just along that single metric. I refer to that as legal totalism. We shouldn't be legal totalists. We should put emphasis on who is. You should be able to know what the next part I'm going to say now. Because if you listen to that video, you should know what that part is. We should pay attention to who is what, who is playing negative-sum games. If you make the false equivalence on this, that all players play negative-sum games to an equal degree, well then you are absolutely not just going to raise my blood pressure, you're going to make it go through the roof. I'm not here for it. But yeah, so yeah, if you think censorship is not just obnoxious and tedious, setting back to the issue I meant to talk about as a precursor to the topic. I don't know why I derailed so much on Ben's comment. I guess because it's really bugging me that much that I can't be persuasive. I really should be, but I can't. It's tragic. But yeah, the other thing I want to say, if you really do believe that censorship is the biggest contributor to why we're in doxastic shambles, let's just say. Doxastic deliberation has never been this bad on the internet, partly because so many normies are now, who weren't on the internet when I fled from normies to come to the internet because the internet was more crisp and analytic. That's no longer the case, and that's really the problem. It's not that censorship is retarding us. Censorship has, in certain societies in the past, like when you get rid of entire philosophy departments, as the Bolsheviks did after they took reigns, like, yeah, okay. In specific epochs, like specific maybe decades we can say, censorship was the biggest reason why things turned mindless. That's not the case in contemporary cultural doxastic deliberation, let's say. No, there's no deliberation going on. There's polemics, there's antics, and there is people with the highest resolution. I'm not even counting myself as one of them, but there's a lot of them. If you follow my low bars, they're not household names. That's the biggest problem. And I want to debate people who don't agree with me on this, because I think that it's one of these most obvious things, and it's important to point out, because it's important to start shaming not just people who go around censoring, but it's important to start shaming people who don't know the names that they need to know and the works of those people that they need to know. That should be embarrassing. It should be embarrassing at this point to not know who Derek Parfit was, because his works had been so publicly accessible for such a long time. Either summaries of his works or even the full books. There's e-book versions of his works. So, yeah, people need to be embarrassed. If there's someone I don't know who I should know, and I start reading them, and I'm like, how am I only discovering this person right now? Like they're enhancing my perspective. I'd have no problem pointing out how embarrassed I am. and ashamed of myself that it took me as long as it did to hypothetically figure out one such person. Admittedly, it's been a while since that's happened, because I really do survey a lot of different... See, that's the other thing. People just don't survey. People don't survey different outgroups. They might have some vague awareness of what an outgroup believe, but they don't go deep into the outgroup tent. The the term escapes me now, but there's an official term. I can't think of it now. God, it's bugging me. Enemy fortress, I guess, is the closest thing that I can think of. But there's a better term than enemy fortress. People don't spend time kind of undercover in the enemy fortress, and you don't even have to be undercover. You can just lurk. It's so clear when I listen to people at work. My biggest pet peeve with people is that they need to be agreeable in their social relationships. Maybe this is just how bad things are in the Lower Mainland. Maybe this is not your experience, but here, like, just no one has any real grip on what people who disagree with them, why they believe what they do, trying to justify it. Like, I often just say, like, can you just LARP as this person you just criticized? They can't begin to do it. They can't begin to talk like their opponents, because growing up, it's just so obvious. They only hung out with like-minded people. That's the biggest problem, one of the biggest social pathologies. That's why the gender discourse is as bad as it is. Like, there's just so many people, they don't know what it's like to be good friends, maybe even best friends, on these disagreeable grounds, where conflict and even insults are just casually spouted. Insults owing to conflict, ideological and attitudinal and other. Long-standing conflict, like, this is probably the biggest culture shock. Eastern Europe to the West is just not just in terms of friendships, but even just in terms of familial. Because like, me and my parents, we just summon each other to hell casually, and when it's really a fierce debate, we mean it in the moment. Like, objectively, the right thing, the right kind of retribution for you would be to end up burning in hell for a little bit. It's not that we wouldn't have. It's not that when I summon when I summon casually my old man to hell, in that moment I do actually want to see him roast. It doesn't mean that I wouldn't feel compassion if it actually happened. I would, but I mean it in the moment, because the thing he says is just so despicable that objectively, on a third-person analyst standpoint, that's the kind of thing he deserves for having said what he said. And then he says it back to me when I say something that sets him off. And this is just all very, very casual in familial Eastern European dynamics. I mean, it's just Slavs summon each other to hell casually more than I think any other ethnicity. This kind of intra-Slav conflict and ruggedness. I really think it's just that East Asians outdo us in terms of the amount of butchering they've done to themselves. But you can see how that kind of fervor, casual summoning of hell, leads to, you know, kind of butcherings. And really, I think we're the runners. We're not the worst in terms of intra-ethnicity violence and genocide and stuff like that, but we're probably second, following the East. Like the Japanese and the Chinese did a lot to each other, so they've got one over on us. But it doesn't have to go that far, right? Certainly, I never butchered anyone, but I've certainly had my fair share of friendships and even parent-child dynamics with my folks, where it's not just summoning each other to hell. It's a lot of other things that don't translate to English well, so I can't even describe it. But when you have that be your upbringing, obviously it spills into friendships all the way throughout adolescence, and I just know what it's like to be on good terms with people who are very disagreeable, and I'm disagreeable from their vantage point as well. And there's a comfort level there, even though there's a lot of viciousness and genuine, heartfelt enmity. There is a lot of enmity, and that's why I use the word frenemy as often as I do, because I don't think I've ever had anything other than a frenemy. And that's why I see so many things in like the way America tries to grapple with its ideological polarization, and how they can't see that these are two different things. Ideological polarization need not give way to affective polarization. But it's just the fact that it took the fact that it took the MAGA phenomenon for so many Americans to realize they had such deep disagreements with each other. Like, what were these people talking about before? What were these people talking about before 2015? Were they talking about anything meaningful at all? If they were, it shouldn't have taken, it couldn't have taken a low-resolution figure like DJ T to bring all these arguments out in the fore, right? So it comes down to just people are way too infirm socially. They're social agents first and foremost. To whatever extent they're moral agents, it has to comport with how that moral conduct or even moral beliefs, how they will lead to them being perceived as social agents. Whereas with me, it just doesn't matter. I don't care. I'll be the biggest pariah in history because it's all I've ever known. It's all I've ever known is these tenuous friendships, and truly, no one, even when the friendship was at its least disagreeable, I still would have probably been more comfortable summarizing the two of us as frenemies more than friends. And that's good. That's why I'm so head and shoulders above like 99% of the internet, because I don't have a hard time venturing off into the enemy fortress. And whatever the other term is that I still can't remember. There's the enemy fortress, and I'm comfortable in it because that's all I've ever known. Both in terms of the familial dynamics and in terms of every single friend I've ever had. We just argued, and we argued in these bitter ways, and it's just so clear that if people can disagree on things that are as low resolution as these political disputes, and they can't handle the fact that they're not persuasive to the other side, so they embark on the path of least resistance, that they convince themselves to cope around the fact that they're not able to persuade the other outgroup. They just start convincing themselves that the outgroup is defective in some sort of essentialist way. Right? And so when you truly convince yourself of that, then it's no longer, you no longer have to give yourself any amount of flack for the fact that you're not convincing. Whereas like I always give myself flack over the fact that I'm not convincing because I don't know what it's like to go to a these dinner parties and other kinds of social gatherings and weddings are at the top of my shit list. Like it just makes so much sense that I've never been invited to a wedding, and that I can count on one hand the amount of time that I've been invited to one of these parties, not necessarily a house party, but like a dinner party where it's just baked, it's never stipulated, but it's just implicitly understood by everyone, especially when it's a upper class phenomenon, but it extends to middle and working class social gatherings as well. Like, you're not supposed to go in there and be a buzzkill and exert pressure on people to justify their bullshit. It's all supposed to be positive vibes. The moment you disrupt the positive vibes by challenging something someone says in a non-jokey way, people do challenge each other, but it's always in this jokey comedic way such that I can just get up and say, well, what exactly do any of you believe? And it will not be clear, because to get around the fact that they don't want to be perceived as buzzkills and they don't want to kill the positive vibes, any kind of glimmer of a challenge is always buttressed with humor so that no one really feels like their back is up against the wall. That's the biggest pathology, not just in American, but in, broadly speaking, I think Western social settings. So many people are petrified of conflict. The moment there's something that may inch toward conflict, there's always this comedic padding. And that's why you get so many people who they're just so desperate to be funny. They're so desperate to be funny because they're afraid to actually have a disagreement that may actually get one person's or both parties blood boiling. Because all they've ever known is agreeability. All I've ever known is, yeah, I like my friends. They're now more erstwhile friends than current friends, but I still overall enjoyed their company and preferred their company. But yeah, they were always frenemies before they were friends. And this probably gets at another issue that will ultimately loop into the gender thing, but when people call themselves MSTOWs, people in the incelosphere often, and they tell the MGTOWs, you guys are not real MGTOWs, you're actually MSTOWs, you are not men going your own way, you are men sent your own way. All of this ignores this, just how many people there might actually be who have no stomach for this show up to a dinner party and never challenge any of the bullshit anyone says. Just go along with it. If you say something contrary, make sure that you end it with a little jokey joke, so that no one actually feels that they need to defend their bullshit. It's like, there's going to be a lot of people who just have no stomach for that. I'm probably at the top of that list. And so when you call yourself a MSTOW, and not just in these social contexts, but in these nightclub, nightlife, garden of heathen context, it's like you signal very strongly that it's not just that you were past tense sent your own way as a man sent his own way, as opposed to men going his own way. You very much signal that you would be willing to make your way back if they would have you. See, this very much loops into the gender thing. Because at least if you are one of the people who has posted at length and exposed the duplicities, the hypocrisies, the sliminess, the vapidity, the shallowness of this your typical nightlife outgoing person. And then you, at the end of it, you still give MGTOWs flack for calling themselves MGTOWs with a G and being in denial that they're actually MSTOWs. It does indicate to me that like you would go back if they would take you. These people who have nothing to offer, nothing, at least if you're tugged by the mind to some extent. If you're 100% will and your mind is just there so it can be a means to actualize your ends, which is all just the will, because that's you view your role in life as being a servant to your will as opposed to an explorer of your mind. And that's why a term like MSTOW, you think that's kind of the black-pilled way to summarize MGTOWs, to call them men sent their own way. It indicates to me that you would go back if the sleazy floozies, the toilet, the very women you call toilets because of the way they conduct themselves, and worse things than toilets even. But then in another post, you call yourself a men sent his own way. Like, you would go back and interact with people you refer to as toilets and people you, not always, but in a lot of cases, accurately describe as pathological. Hybristophilia being the primary reason. It's like, how can you possibly not see how pathetic you are? You are as pathetic as them if you go around referring to MGTOWs or yourself as not MGTOW but MSTOW. I mean, to me, this should be clear just in simple social contexts. You don't even have to take it to these lewd Garden of Heathen contexts in the way of nightlife. I just saw this in my past. I could always tolerate each of my friends in one-on-one contexts. The moment it was 3 or more, myself included, 3 or more, everyone just tried so hard to be funny. They had no way of seeing how unfunny their attempts were. Everyone just talked over top of each other. It was all chaotic. Any semblance of an analytical approach to the conversation went out the window. The moment it's a group, it is a shame that I can't think of a single sociologist who has devoted any amount of work, like even just one chapter in their book or even just a paragraph or a few sentences, to this. I'm sure I'm not the only one who, yes, I call my friends frenemies, but nonetheless I would say that overall I enjoyed their company far more often than not. But that was only when it was a one-on-one conversation, because I saw how they changed and how they lost their bearing. They lost their grip on doing third-person analysis, conversationally speaking. If you don't understand that your primary role as a good conversationalist is to be the observer and the third-person spectator, and to comment the way the lowbrow version of this would be Ed the Sock, for example, that I kind of took my cues from very early in mid-adolescence. Like, Ed the Sock was the third-person commentator. Now I see just how clueless he is, because I check his Twitter every now and then. He's also maybe not low resolution, but he's very much mid-resolution. But to me, growing up, it's like, yeah, Ed the Sock, that's high-resolution commentary. Because he strived to be impartial. He strived to not just be self-indulgent, not just to giggle, not just to... This is what a lot of people do. They just giggle compulsively. It's one thing to say a joke that's not funny. It's one other thing to laugh at your own joke, and then to laugh aggressively and almost compulsively, and not even after the joke is done. And this is an unfunny joke. A very unfunny joke, but just over and over again when there would be 3 or more people hanging out. The joke is painfully unfunny, it is tedious, and it's not just that the joke teller laughs after because the other people laugh and he kind of gets going because he hears them laugh. It's they laugh aggressively throughout. They laugh aggressively throughout telling their joke. And that's somehow not a social faux pas. That's not tabooed, right? Saying, using like unnecessarily in your sentences. I started picking up on this at 14, 15. And yet no one's social star rose or fell along these lines that to me are clearly the lines. If you pack like excessively, if you do upspeak, if you do any of these things, that's what should cause your social standing to rise or fall more than anything else. And so their social standing fell per my lights, and so I slowly but surely all these friendships just dissipated, and rightly so, because I wasn't going to tolerate the intolerable. When you call yourself a MSTOW, that is to say a man who was sent his own way, who your posts clearly indicate to me that you understand. You understand why a lot of people who you say sent you your own way are intolerable? It indicates to me that you would go back. You're that owned by the will. You're that disinterested in expanding your mind that the people who, by your own description, are unstomachable, if they took you back, you'd go back to them. You'd come crawling back to them. I'm not saying the whole incelosphere talks this way, but it's certainly worse now, last I popped in, than it was in 2018 when I first took the plunge following ContraPoints video, when I decided, like, I gotta look into this. This is... ContraPoints is not telling us the full story on this. And yeah, there was a lot of this kind of stuff too, but nowhere near as often as it is now. You're not the based man. I'll tell you that much. You're not the based man if you'd be willing to go back. I thought it stopped recording, but it didn't. I'm still a bit cautious about the recording thing. I'm back on the camera because this thing is just... It's the devil I know versus the devil I don't. So it's, yeah, maybe I did finally fix it. I recorded it up against the wall. It recorded for a long time again, but it also recorded up against the wall for a long time with the last gender video. So yeah, there's a lot here that I just glossed. But let me know if you can relate to this. If one-on-one, your erstwhile friends or your maybe current day friends, maybe you, unlike me, didn't go out of your way to have all these friendships fade. Let me know if you always found it harder to get along with people who you might have called your friends and frenemies when it was a group dynamic, because you saw how they just got a little too excited and they tried too hard and they talked over everyone, including myself, and that's what I hate more than anything else probably, is being talked over. How am I doing energy-wise? Maybe my energy level bumped up a bit. I didn't think that I would go into as much on this specific front, but I do think it very much... You can't discuss the Incelian or the MGTOW phenomenon without branching off into just how insufferable most people are, because then you're just a step away from the Jordan Peterson platitude that says jump through hoops so you can, like, somehow these guys need to work on their social skills. Like, the guys who mean better than anyone else and whose posts are based and more in their own way more down to earth than anyone who is any local here by leaps and bounds. It's like, I'm being told, I listen to Jordan Peterson, like, I'm not supposed to tell these locals who may be in some ways more content because they're outgoing, like, I'm not supposed to tell them that their social skills, per any sensible standard, their social skills are in the dumpster, because they do these sorts of things, like upspeak or like, when the like has nothing to do with the structure of the sentence. They just, instead of speaking a bit more slowly, they just speak really fast. And so, for their mind to catch up with their tongue, they infuse their sentences with a bunch of unnecessary likes. But these are all far more often than I remember just being puzzled by this at 15. Like, how are these the socially successful people. I'll tell you how, because the culture is pathological. The culture is pathological. And this condescension to men who at least some of them had no taste for this. And so went their own way. And so you're going to condescend to them by telling them that like they need to hone their social skills. They need to do this. They need to do that. They need to jump through all sorts of hoops. It's so embarrassing that no sociologist or no public intellectual sees through this. That the moment it's a majority that at least seems on the surface to be content and a minority that is discontent, like somehow that minority is doing something wrong and they need to be more like the majority and comport themselves to the attitudes and sensibilities and proclivities and inclinations and pathologies of that majority so they can be more content. It's like no. Listen to what I said in my video on gender. Listen to everything I said if you haven't listened to it twice. And then re-listen to this. It'll be crystal clear. It'll be crystal clear that anyone who calls themselves a MSTOW as opposed to a MGTOW just is too indebted into their own will, is too indebted into the perspective impulsive life. But it's good not to live the impulsive life. If you have anything negative to say about all the people you rail against, and rail against too often, like I like Black Mind, he's opened my eyes to a lot of things, but he just rails against Western broads in almost every video, and it just seems like that's a bad look. I want to leave a comment to him telling him that like just the fact that it's a hobby horse for him, they shouldn't live rent-free in his head, but they do. Black Mind. Here's the best thing that I found out from Black Mind. He's in Saudi now. I don't know where exactly in Saudi, but it's one of these kind of as he puts it, backward Bedouin small towns. And so he refuses to sport the traditional Saudi garments. He doesn't mind all types of Saudi garments or all types of garments that are typically worn by men in that region. But he does not like that one. He goes into why specifically. I think he has said something about it being too hot, especially in the summertime when you have that get-up all over you. So he doesn't sport that. And so he dresses like a typical Westerner. He's been there since, I think since 2016, 2017. So it's been now a number of years, 5 or 6 years of experience of this being a recurring phenomenon. The recurring phenomenon I mention is that he still dresses like a Westerner. He is fluent in the local parlance there, the local tongue. He's fluent, and he never speaks English. When he comes up to a member of public or some sort of transactional thing, he never speaks English. He always speaks the local language and fluently. But because he does not don the local customary wardrobe for a man, and very much is dressed as a Westerner, he can be 2, 3, 4, 5 sentences into what he's saying. The person he's talking to, this can be a transactional context or just something kind of maybe looking for directions out in public. The person, even though they've heard him speak for about 5 seconds, string together a bunch of sentences, the person just says, sorry, no speak English. This is his experience. Because all they do, they don't listen. They just see and they react to what they see. They see a guy dressed as a Westerner, they don't hear that he's speaking their language. They just see that he's dressed the way he's dressed, and so they instinctually, impulsively tell him, no, however it sounds like the way they would pronounce it, I don't even know, but it's very insightful because he connected this to his own experiences. And here's why even this video has a good chance to be taken down. All these issues about hybristophilia, I didn't get racial about any of this, but you listen to Black Mind, you're going to see that hybristophilia is far worse in the, he'll say the Western black woman, but I think it's just really the American black woman. And so he sees through lines in this. Because the very kind of bad treatment he's getting now in Saudi, hasty dismissal, assuming he's speaking English when he's fluent in the language, all they need to do is just see how he's dressed, not hear what he says, to dismiss him. He says there's a through line between that kind of treatment he's getting there and the kind of treatment he got from black women as a shine. He's light-skinned black. As a shine, and the kind of deselection gripes he has along those lines. He would not be able to get a foot in the door. He was connecting this kind of thing with the kind of treatment he got specifically from American black women who just saw that he is this light-skinned black type, that they had these preconceived notions about that not being the, well, maybe I'll use the term again, the 800-pound gorilla in the room. They wanted the black man who was black as coal. That was inculcated in them, or the white guy, but there was this stigma that he's been open about, and kudos to him for being open about it. I commend that. I just don't think that he should do nearly as many videos as he does returning to it. They saw what they saw, and they immediately imbued certain kind of immutable characteristics on that, simply at a glance, at a moment's notice. These are the kinds of things that no media outlet is going to discuss. This is why I say we're lacking in an institutional framework to think critically about this sort of stuff. He never had any kind of mistreatment along those lines from men or gay men. The only duplicate, or we can say near duplicate of that he got is with this wardrobe linguistic mismatch that he's described in his experiences in Saudi for the last 5 or 6 or however many years he's lived there. So if a non-trivial number of, let's say, Western, or I think it's American, but he would say Western, if a non-trivial number of American black women can't hear what a man says, and this is not because he was shooting their shot at them, this is in educational context, this is in professional contexts. He's worked. Came up around I don't know if it was Miami, but somewhere around Atlanta area. If I got that wrong, you'll have to forgive me. I think it was somewhere in the Southwest, so something like that. And so he's worked these various jobs, and he's done secondary, post-secondary accreditation. And so he was in a lot of proximities with black women without any kind of socio-sexual, romantic, flirtatious dynamics going on. But he got mistreated for no other reason that he is a light-skinned black man. He's a shine. And I don't know if it's still the case, but when he was coming up, he's in his mid-40s now. When he was coming up, he said, "This got you deselected from scratch." There was the notion that that complexion carried an effeminate characteristic that was immutable. And these Western broads were more hybristophilic, according to his experiences, than any other racial demographic. And so even though he did not want to be, he wanted to be race loyal, because he always considered himself, as and still does, as a black man. He wanted to be, in his own term, race loyal in spousal, marital context. He doesn't believe in fornication. He's a devout Muslim. I think he copes with Islam, because he wasn't a Muslim before he started encountering these experiences. This is not to disrespect him if he's watching this video. These are just my honest thoughts. Like, I don't think you truly believe, Black Man, if you're watching this, I don't think you actually believe that Islam is literally true. I just think that Islam, just like the passport bro story, this gets a kind of workaround to some of the issues that you experience that you should not have had to experience. It was wrong. Just as it's wrong that these locals right now can't hear what you're saying and assume you're not speaking their language because of the way you're dressed. Likewise, it was wrong that these women that you wanted to be race loyal. He's probably not watching this, so I don't even have to say you, unless I link it to him and timestamp the relevant portions to him, which I might do. You wanted to be race loyal. I don't think that's necessarily admirable or not, but he wanted to be race loyal, so he always paid attention to the conduct, the socio-sexual conduct of black women, and he got nowhere with them, whether or not he was willing to shoot his shot at them. He got nothing but mistreatment because of these stigmas, and so that gets me to certain kinds of things that I want to talk about. I want to kind of buttress a bit more this issue about 3 or more people, and how I know that that's percolating with a lot more people. It did it again, but at least this time it was 33 minutes, which is not that bad. longer than last ones. So maybe I'm inching toward getting it sorted out, but I don't know what else I can do. It always records for longer when I just do a trial run recording instead of the... Anyway, I was saying that this thing has been percolating. I think it's, of all the things that I'm complaining about how there's no widespread discussion on, I really do think that people who enjoyed each of their friends one-on-one far more, like, you don't have to take it to the level I do, but at least I think there might be at least a relative majority who can say that at least to some extent you enjoyed your peers or acquaintances or whatnot far more when they were one-on-one, because they just didn't try to... People are just less performative one-on-one. They're still too performative for my liking, but at least they're much less performative one-on-one than they are when there's an audience or a group. And it's just a complete shame that I can't think of a single sociologist, a single social scientist who talks about this. Maybe you can point me to someone if I've missed them, but I've just never seen it discussed. Of all the things, all the taboo things discussed on the internet, this thing I've identified here, really, I would have thought that I wouldn't have had to really, in a slow burn way, figure it out on my own. But speaking of figuring out slow burn things on your own, it's like you always have a sense that most people are social agents first and foremost, and then the moral agents, they can be that, but it has to comport. It has to fall within the walls of socially acceptable things, and that's why I brought up misandry at the workplace. The way that, you know what? No, it's not even worthy this late in a video talking about it in any kind of detail. I'll just say casual misandry at the workplace, a failure to identify that just because it's not a socially protected group, because of course they've put magnifying glass after magnifying glass on all these other officially formally protected groups and kind of trying to suss out prejudice against them, often where it doesn't even exist. But it just shows they're all social agents first and foremost, because they can't think their way outside of a paper bag. The moment there's an issue of prejudice that doesn't have this long and lionized history of activism that says that this is what the people who are on the side of the angels will do. So if it's a protected group, odds are, especially in North America, it has this long history of decade-spanning activism, and all these activists are portrayed as near saints. And so really that gets people to really think, that does a lot of the thinking for people, not the bigotry per se. If it was the bigotry per se, I wouldn't be picking up on misandry. Like me, I've never complained about misandry. Have you ever heard me complain about misandry on this channel, anywhere, in any kind of comment section? So you gotta know it's bad if I'm noticing it, right? I've rolled my eyes for over a decade. So thinking when I first started going online, you run into someone who was just spot off on me. I'd always roll my eyes at this, but you know when the person who rolls his eyes at it for I think over a decade after first coming online. A few years ago, I stopped rolling my eyes at it, but I didn't notice it. I certainly didn't notice it in any of my standard day-to-day movement. Certainly never noticed that it worked. Of course, you can notice it online, but of course you can notice anything online, because anyone who's got a pulse can log online and spout their bullshit, right? But the fact that I'm noticing it at work, and I'm not going to give it the dignity of describing it, other than to point out that maybe it's one of those shit-testy things, because if I overheard it, maybe I was meant to overhear it. So I'm always keeping that possibility, but I certainly confronted it, right? The thing the non-based man would do is just chuckle along. The non-based man who thinks that he's got to have game. More on that in the future. But obviously this game stuff. It's like a kid who lived upstairs in my old building back in the early 2000s. There was this kid who, when I would, he lived right next door to my friend. My friend lived on the upstairs floor. So whenever I would go to my friend's place, knock on his door, want to go hang out, this kid would always jump out. He was this bright-eyed, energetic kid who had so much spunk to him. I think he was like between maybe 7 and 9, if I had to guess at that point. But what he would do, for a number of years, he would run up to me and he would kick me in the legs. He was always super excited when I would come by and knock on my friend's door and ask me to hang out, he would hear my knock, and then he would come out of his room, come out of his apartment, and then would run up to me, and he would just kick me in the shins and run away, hoping that I would chase him, right? And now, I wouldn't chase him, but I would kind of give him a bit of a smirk and a bit of a, I'm glad you're having fun at my expense. That was my approach. But the kid clearly would have had a lot more fun if I would have chased him and just indulged in this game of tit for tat, you kick me, I kick you back. Well, if I kicked him, I would have knocked his face out, the way he kicked me. But he never tired of it. There was just, I guess, something about me that he found amusing. Sometimes he did it to my friend as well, but he really sought me out. And I never really indulged it. I indulged it a bit with the occasional quip, but I never actually played tag with him. This kid wanted to play a game of kick tag, and I was just too dignified. And so that's how men need to understand themselves when they're being shit tested. Instead of all these dating roaches following their instructions on what to do in the case of a shit test, no, you do what I did when this immature little kid, almost every single time I knocked on my friend's door in the upstairs floor, the kid next to him, the kid living next door to him, tries to kick me and play a game of kick tag. It's the equivalent of that, right? So I noticed this, what may have been misandric commentary that I overheard. I'm always keeping in mind that there's a reason I'm overhearing this. They could be talking more quietly. But I made all the points I made. They didn't have any retorts. The first thing I said is, it's not that I find any of this offensive, right? Let's just get that straight, because then they will use that to try to knock me off of my third-person analyst mantle. So the first thing I always say is, it's not that you guys can say everything you want. You guys can say things that are 10 million times worse than this, but you don't understand that your ideology is a puzzle piece. And that's because you've been led astray by all kinds of intersectional rhetoric, though I doubt they even know what intersectionality is, but just these kind of all too convenient gynocentric metrics for what we ought to be concerned about as a protected versus non-protected group. And I'm noticing it at work more and more frequently. I never noticed it back in the day, so it's like there's a tipping point. There's a tipping point where at some point things that you roll your eyes at, just because you rolled your eyes at them, and because people probably do exaggerate. I'm sure there's a lot of exaggeration across the manosphere about just how much misandry there is in society, but there is more, because I can't navigate my day-to-day life without any, even seeing there was a billboard here. There was a billboard here. I should have, the next time I see it, I'll take a shot. I'll take a photo of it and do a community post on it. A billboard here where it's a guy and he's not getting the text back. I guess the term is he's being ghosted, and the little message in the billboard says, "Keep trying." I forgot exactly verbatim what it said, but the thing is, just because she's not replying doesn't mean you should give up. Keep trying. This was a billboard. Like, our billboards have gotten even dumber. I think it's kind of supposed to be cutesy, but it's just this. I think there's, I don't know, I think maybe Ass Woman has all the people, like, there's a reason why Ass Woman is in my algorithm all the time, even though I keep clicking do not recommend. And maybe these kind of allies of Ass Woman have these people who create these billboards on their payroll, or they have like compromised photos of them, so that now they get to air the kind of simpish billboards that I'm seeing. It's a travesty, and let's understand, there is no anti-simp revolution taking place. You can say there's a simp backlash, but if you actually have the right attitude towards simps, you'll understand that simping by proxy is a far worse phenomenon than is direct simping, where the object of the guy, the chick that he's simping for, actually perceives the simp. No, the vast majority of the simping that I've been disgusted by is when it's like it's not within her earshot. It's like my friend who, like, elbow says something flattering about her appearance and expects me to double that and to join in on that chorus. My old man did that all the time. And it doesn't even have to be an articulated thing. My old man, one of the things that put me off him, remember, as early as 6 or 7, is that when there was an attractive woman walking down the street, he's the sort of guy who he didn't have to make any remarks, but he would want it to be seen that he follows her with the turning of his head. Like, he wanted to make it so clear to me, I think even, that he was checking her out. And that is a kind of simping. She doesn't have to see it. Just as when my friend flattered some dame without her hearing it, like, he was simping by proxy. A lot of people would try to get you to think about settling down and finding a trad wife. I would also count that as simping by proxy. There's a lot of ways this simping phenomenon is a more wide-reaching phenomenon than just this direct guy shows up on OnlyFans and pays to have her send him her coom. Like, yeah, that's turbo simping and turbo orbiting. But man, if they're gonna take this modest backlash and actually run with it, more guys need to realize that simping by proxy is actually the majority of the cases where it actually happens. And when you talk this way and when you refuse to, when you get that little elbow and your friend somehow needs you to reassure and reaffirm his sentence about how attractive the chick is, if you don't play ball with that, you're going to just have to, I'm just going to tell you in advance, you're going to have to be expecting the rumor mill that you're gay or something. And that's a man who is not enslaved by the will and who truly does live for the mind is not going to be fazed by that. Now, if you live in the Bible Belt, and the rumor mill about you being gay might get you into some sort of violent clash with the Hicks or stuff like that, okay, you got to assess that for yourself. But if you're in a relatively non-homophobic city or neighborhood, I would say don't even worry about the rumor mill. But never lend flatteries. Lending flatteries by proxy, by just saying something as a kind of maybe a male camaraderie. This is what a lot of male camaraderie guys are convinced that this is what it consists in. It essentially it consists in simping by proxy. But you shouldn't do it. It's not just about her ego, that you're blowing up her ego. This is what the Manosphere has figured out. It's like, don't blow up her ego. Fair enough, but also, don't soil your own dignity. Is it necessarily a soiling of dignity? Yes, because odds are, if she's dressed scantily clad enough to the point where it catches your friend's eye. This is what I'm going to have to tell my dad's twins. They're going to turn 17 in less than a month now, and so I got to have this talk with them. It's going to be a talk that my dad's going to explode if he finds out I had with him. But yeah, it's the children he had with in his second marriage. I'm absolutely going to have to sit them down and tell them this and explain it in a way that's maybe even better than right now. I'm just going to have to be in the right mindset. But so far so good in terms of what I know about them. They haven't given into any of this stuff. But if she catches your eye, it's a high enough chance that she's just raised on stuff like the shitty housewives of New Jersey or the Kardashians or all this other media that I like I said at the beginning of the video, I fled TV land and I fled meat space and I fled all these things specifically. I specifically came to the internet because I saw my friends lose themselves in all this crap. Enough of my friends and the willingness to, they always knew that I had a negative view of nightclubs, because we'd play hockey on Friday, Saturday nights, and then we'd walk back, and I somehow sniffed out the gynocentrism of nightclubs. I somehow, as a mid-teen kid, I was able to sniff out there's something did not sit right with me with all these things, with all these just the level of cologne and perfume. Like, you're walking back home. We just played hockey. We're walking back home, and there's a long lineup. It's December. They're trembling in their mini skirts, waiting to get in. So that's like strike one. Strike two is just the overdose of cologne and perfume. You don't even have to be near the line to realize it. And then my friends passed this like, dude, I can't wait till we're old enough to actually start going to these clubs. I'm like, did you hear the snippets of these conversations that we just heard? Did you hear them? Did you see them tremble? Did you see them yeah, just the whole nine yards. I don't want to get into all these other examples, but you don't have to be in the club to see all the pathologies of the club. And again, I wish I had the term gynocentric back then to really one-off summarize it, because that's what it is. But it's just amazing how good I was at sussing out this stuff. Because at that point, I didn't even know that, at least for these clubs here, if you're a chick, you don't pay admission. If you're a guy, you pay admission. In some cases, if you're a hot chick, a really hot chick, a knockout, and you come with a guy, that guy doesn't have to pay admission. Some of the most, but see, it ties back into, if there is no lauded, long, activist-infused history of battling against a given kind of prejudicial behavior, people are just not going to think on their own about it. And it's often the very people who cannot imagine as to how blacks in America could have been as mistreated as they were. Because they're not thinking about how the actual common forms of mistreatment. They're not thinking about how, like, the average white person didn't want to lynch black people throughout the history of Jim Crow and even prior to it. The average white person didn't want to do that. The average white person just had that kind of prejudicial attitude of, oh, how cute. It thinks it's people. Let's have it dance for us. But don't hurt it. It still feels pain, but it's cute in the sense that it thinks it's people. That was the prejudice. And that's the kind of prejudice that you are mindlessly accepting if you just see that, A, the average guy doesn't get in for free, pays admission. The chick does. And then even in the intra-female sphere, if it's a hot chick here, I don't know if this is the nature of clubs everywhere, but here with the hot chick, she brings her girlfriends, she brings her guy. It's not just her that she gets it for free, but because she's hot, the rest of her crew can get it for free, or at least one person. I don't know about multiple, but I'm sure it's gone to that point now. And this is why I so trust my intuitions, because even as a child, when there was something off, I didn't know that this was a fact about the admissions, that she doesn't have to pay, and that if she does herself up, if she spends like 2 hours on hair and makeup to the point where she really looks that good, like, they are encouraged to let not only them in, but then also whoever's accompanying her in. And there's a bunch of reasons why to never step foot into any of these gardens of heathen, even if that hadn't been the case. But that was really just the kind of ultimate nail in the coffin. And I was able to figure all this out just by walking by these lines of my friends back when we were playing hockey, and I was just so disgusted with them. And that's also, I think, part of the reason why we fell out, is because they spent more time on their education, and they wouldn't admit that to me. I had to find out through my own methods, because they knew I would give them shit if I found out how slavishly devoted, at least some of them were, to their scholastic pursuits. But I also think this other thing that I never did find out, but I also just think that they started going to clubs when they turned adults, and they knew I would chew their ass out, and so they never told me. But I absolutely am in the right for wanting to chew them out, had I had definitive proof that that's actually what they started doing. I had definitive proof that at least one, not really friend, but more kind of acquaintance, started doing it. And so when I confronted him about it, and when I tried to argue in a meager way, obviously the case I can make against any of these gardens of heathen now are far better than the case I could make as a late teen, early 20s type. But nonetheless, it's not somewhere you go as just a minimally self-respecting man. Even if you can get in for free, let's say you're with her, and she gets to have whoever's with her, go in for free as well because she's just spent that much time on hair and makeup. You would, as a self-respecting man, not go in simply because your kind is not afforded the same privilege. Any kind of lopsided environment, you should dislodge yourself from. And if you don't, then you should just fess up to the fact that you are one of these people who can only think critically about bigotries when there's this formal institutional framework for it, because of these, because you're on the side of the angels, because, oh look, MLK was an activist, and look at all the devotion he did. And so that's just something we'll bow to, and we'll not think for one split second, even though many geneticists and epigeneticists now, to bring it back to lookism and racism, they believe that race is just skin deep, right? So that's why sometimes people will often say, like, they don't want us in this neighborhood because of the way we look. It's like, yeah, that is the right way to phrase it, because on at least certain scientific views on race, it is not its own scientific phenomenon. It is purely arbitrary, these distinctions between where one race stops being its own race and another one starts being another one. It's not a valid taxonomy. And progressives like that fact, and it is usually the progressives who are the most mindless in terms of putting all these magnifying glasses, looking for racial prejudice, and being completely mindless in the sense that they don't realize that racism is just a derivation of lookism. Like, without lookism, you cannot have racism. The only way you can is if the hereditarians are right, and that there is something scientifically interesting and scientifically potent about race, the human races. That answer is ultimately not interesting to me. I'm just interested in how people can't see that their ideology is a puzzle piece. And I'm sorry, but when I say people, 9 times out of 10, it's these broads that'll get hyper judgmental, but then take advantage of all these nightlife privileges that, you know, it only takes a sociopath to criticize. That's also something that just the tabooing of this, and the amount of men who cave because they're petrified of being on the wrong end of the taboo thing when it's something that's going to impact how you are perceived at nightlife. Like, if you get a reputation for this and you want to increase your body count, you're not going to be able to fulfill that role as easily as you would have if you just mindlessly accepted something like the fact that you mindlessly accept that racism is a derivation of lookism, but then you're still going to treat it completely differently so you can ingratiate yourselves in the good graces of fickle Nimrods. So, yeah, so just dating roaches they put all the wrong ideas in guys' heads. The idea that you even need to have game to give them what they want anyway, that's female game. You fucking idiots. Guys are paying dating coaches to learn how to spout these sexual abracadabras and hocus pocuses without realizing, like, that's female game, is to convince you that you need game. You have been gamed by trying to have game. It's as simple as that, and so few guys realize it. And even if they realize it, they'll act as if it's not true, because realizing it still doesn't mean that you're going to guarantee to increase your body count. So the other story is you shouldn't care about body count anyway. It's not that sex is overrated, but I think a lot of this goes back to the incel thing. It's not that sex is overrated. It's that a lot of people believe that by having sex, you will expand your mind, whether spiritually or in some way. Sex is a kind of mind-expanding activity, and it is a necessary ingredient for the good life, right? So anyone who tells you sex is overrated is probably someone who just has a low libido. It's not, but all this crap about it being this deeply spiritual experience and you're never going to be able to think quite like you did, you'll be a different person after it, that is as delusive as the sort of parents who, when they first have their child, now they realize all these things about the importance of being kind people and the importance of being a person on planet Earth. And it wasn't until they saw the love in their child's eyes that they truly realized what love is, right? You know how certain parents start talking about that in that way. All they're doing is just advertising how solipsistic they are as people by saying that they didn't realize all these truths. Like, they don't enhance their perspective by reading something that's challenging. They enhance their perspective by seeing their newborn and seeing the love in their eyes. And now they're wiser people because of that, right? So that kind of thing, I think, can also be imported to people who say that they've become wiser people, or in some sense broader people, broader minds. They've broadened their minds because they fucked. No. So this is yet another thing that I have here that's not going to be reinforced by any side. The people who say sex is overrated, I can only assume that it's because they've got low libidos. But that still doesn't prove that because they're wrong in saying sex is overrated for like the majority of people, they wouldn't just extend it to themselves. That can be wrong, but so too is it wrong to say that sex is going to absolutely transcend your sexual psyche even. Like pre-sexual intercourse, sexual psyche, post-sexual intercourse, sexual psyche. Like, my sexual psyche hasn't changed. It is what it is. Sex is a crass activity, and just like many other crass activities, we don't have to be ascetics about it, but we also shouldn't fawn over it, and we also shouldn't cut any slack to people who like you would want to have sex with, for instance, but there are people who comport themselves in despicable ways. Like the fact that people think that Kim Kardashian, ass woman, does something other in public than just go around fawning over herself. That there's this entrepreneurial angle to her, and she's actually really shrewd, and this is really cerebral at the end of the day, and it's not just a woman who's just going around fawning over herself in public. Like there's a lot of people who believe this, and this is kind of pushed. This is why I had to, in my algorithm, get piece after piece with just the title discussing her having gone to law school. Like this is something that was like important for me to know. It's like because there's this attempt to get you to not think about her the way you ought to think about her, and that is this is just a woman who fawns over herself in public. And sex with her would be fun. No one should deny that sex with her would be fun, but that doesn't mean that you should not refer to. That doesn't mean you shouldn't call a spade a spade. It's just another woman making a career out of the fact that she just fawns over herself in public. Snail space. I'm at a snail space for this second installment of the Gender Trilogy video. So all of that was October 27th. I watched it on the day I recorded it, and then I just left it alone until now. Today is November 17th, so I gotta speed this stuff up. In my defense, I was wrapping up the first installment of the Gender Trilogy video, so that postponed all of this. But I do need to put in a lot more for the second installment, because so much of this first installment was not even about gender, so I need to now hammer the gender stuff. A few qualifiers about the stuff I mentioned in what you just saw. Black Mind was not thoroughgoingly deselected as a shine on the grounds of these, colorism assumptions. The word they use typically is colorism, and it's usually the black women who complain about it the most, but actually they perpetuate it a lot more than they receive it against the so-called shines. Though don't call Black Mind that, he doesn't refer to himself as that anymore. I only found that out after October 27th, after I watched all those videos. But he wasn't thoroughgoingly deselected. They were examples to the contrary. It's just that he didn't like doing some of the stuff he did so as to put himself in a better position. And it was among black women in his old high school that he talked about putting himself in a better position. One example was that in his senior year of high school, he was in a fight. After he won that fight, he started to receive the sort of attention he had never received before. And so that also speaks to hybristophilia. A lot of discourse on that channel does deal with hybristophilia, and as I did point out in what you just watched, it does seem to be overrepresented among the American black woman. He would extend that to all Western black women. It's overrepresented across the West as compared to the East. It scantily exists outside of Western societies, at least in terms of behavior and behavior that gets uploaded to publicly accessible internet. So we don't know what goes on behind closed doors. But he thinks that this is a uniquely non-white phenomenon in America and outside, whereas I think it's uniquely non-white specifically in America. But that doesn't matter. The point is, this is a man who had to engage in fights. Not that he had to, but when he was provoked, he didn't back down. And when that happened, he just noticed the fallout of that was he started receiving attention from the very sort of women that he, in the interest of being race loyal, he hadn't been getting before, even though he wanted. He also just doesn't trust white women because of the, the black man and white woman tropes about, you know, the kind of America's racial history with that. You're always kind of walking a tightrope when you're doing some of that stuff. So I just also needed to add that in. His black mind wasn't always, and he was even married in the West before leaving. He left in 2014. I didn't mention the specific year when I talked about it before. He left in 2014, and it is... How do you tell a guy like that he does sound paranoid in some instances? I know I'm linking to him, so I should just point out that this is certainly one of the warts and all channels. I'm not saying this guy's spouting nothing but truths, obviously. As a Muslim, he's going to go wrong just there alone. And there is some amount of paranoia, but or blackanoia, but I think certainly that if you take at face value what he said, and it doesn't appear that he's bullshitting at all, this is just one of many men who grew up 80s, 90s, as soon as it was coming up, when he was entering puberty and things of that sort. He's not the only one who's come out with confessions of his own, talking about how it was only after having won these fights, or at least the one specific fight in high school, he didn't want to keep doing it after because he was an adult. But that's what led to the sort of attention that he felt that he should have gotten well before. So it's a fascinating YouTuber. I'll probably have a lot more to say on him, and I'll probably have a lot more to say on a great number of things that implicates the Black Manosphere. Because as fascinating as generic manosphere is, SYSBM, this stuff, this is why there's a thriving Black Manosphere, and why they're getting a lot of things wrong, and they're getting a lot of things wrong because their kind of central figure was a guy like Kevin Samuels, who he's dead now, but Kevin Samuels should not have been nearly as popular as he was, even within the Black Manosphere. But moving on, I've got so many things. I've got bullet points here. There's at least 10 other themes. I didn't count them up. It's probably over 10. But I've just got 10 bullet points, and each bullet point is its own theme. And me knowing me, I'm probably going to average like at least 20 minutes per theme. So I don't know how I'm going to squeeze everything into a trilogy. So instead, for those of you who have stuck around this long, I may do this in an interlude video as well. But for those of you who have stuck in this long, I value your feedback more than anyone else. I'm just going to read out from these little bullet points that I have, and then maybe you can tell me which ones I should leave out or leave in, which ones you want to hear me give a fleshed out view on. All gendered, to say the least. But before I get into that, I went pretty hard on gym cells in the first installment of the trilogy, and that's not fair. One thing I said about the sort of college professors and many other kind of gender therapists give men the sort of advice that says you should open up, and then I ripped into them at one part of that video, and I ripped into them because it's like, well, you gotta ask what a man's zip code is, you gotta ask what a man's, like, what kind of surroundings is he in. Like, obviously everyone would agree with me that this is the right thing to do if, for example, you're in a war zone and you're about to break down, or you're actually in enemy territory and you're about to break down. The more open you are about your vulnerability and about the fact that you're in fear, the worse of a go you're going to have it. But it doesn't have to be as far as war zone. It can be in all these other kinds of contexts. intra-sexual male competition contexts, right? You're not going to change people's minds with logic, so it makes sense to just pipe down until you find yourself in a less hostile environment. And the people giving men advice for how to go about in the world don't take these contingencies into account. But I didn't then take contingencies into account when I just went off on the gym cells. Just like there are self-defense reasons not to spout off about vulnerabilities, like even if someone gets in your face and does intimidate you, like it's very unwise to spout off about. In that sense, gym cells can go right and wrong. So a gym cell who is working out in part because he does live in a rough zip code, the ideal thing you want to do in terms of self-defense is just learn your Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You don't even have to be a black belt at it to be far and above most other people, and to be at a point where you can actually hone enough of a self-defense programming such that you're going to be relatively confident in any encounter. Those often manifesting in bullying, and this is something that the anti-bully campaign, so that's why it's such a sham. It's all kind of feel-good, but no one ever casts this as an issue, because then they'd have to go down the statistical rabbit hole that the bullying just is intrasexual male competition, and that bullies see certain kinds of rewards, and all these anti-bullying movements are just hokey and tight-lipped on, or just oblivious. I don't know what's worse, to know about it and to be tight-lipped on it, or to just be fully oblivious. But yeah, we just talk about young boys who find themselves victims of bullying. Obviously, you're not going to spout off about how you may be intimidated by your bully when you're confronted with the bully. But what you want to do first and foremost is you learn your Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You don't have to be a black belt at it. You find that you don't have to be anything close to a black belt to be able to have the vast majority of people, even adults, assuming you're at least in your mid-teens by then, just on the ground tapping out. So that's the first thing in terms of self-defense. I don't even raise this for this reason. I raised this to bring it back to the gym cells because I said I was really rough and I made it seem as if the only possible reason a man might have to work out is to please women. That's obviously not true. The more dangerous your environment is, the more of a reason you have to work out. And not because the workout itself is going to make you more adept at defending yourself, especially when contrasted to something like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, not even having to go all the way to black belt. But it will be good as a preventative tool so that you don't even need to get into the kind of legal dicey scenario where you're attacked, you have the guy down, but maybe you just get a little too rough on him and maybe you do some sort of damage, or just the way he falls, he does damage to himself, right? It's always bad when the fight already happens. One surefire way, not surefire, but one reliable enough way, I'm going to say, to see to it beyond just Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because that doesn't give any kind of physical cue. You don't have a physical cue once you learn your Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. There's no physical cue to any kind of antagonist that you're not the sort of guy to be messed with. That only comes with the workouts. So again, to stress, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is the way to go if you're targeted, even if you've just been targeted once and it didn't go your way. It's enough of a reason. I can look up. I'm sure that unless you're literally in the middle of buttfuck nowhere, there's a center near enough to your place where you can organize this for yourself and you can take one of these courses. But again, that will not lead to any kind of preventative measures. The best thing to do, preventative measures, especially if you're the sort of guy who likes walking around in the middle of the night, as I do, the best sort of thing in terms of preventative measure is working out. And so I omitted that from the last video. I made it seem like any man who works out strictly does it to please women. No, you can do it as a matter of just visually making it less likely that you're going to be targeted, and that's a perfectly valid reason. If you live in a safe neighborhood and you work out, even that reason goes out the window, but maybe not if you're the kind of night walker type or just a night owl. Then maybe even in relatively safe neighborhoods you have reason enough to just look bigger. So those are valid reasons for working out. I wish I could redo that video and include that, given how hard I was on the gym cells. Because even a gym cell can work out in part for this reason. But I think that it's just absolutely unacceptable for any self-respecting man to do is to work out on his abs. If there's ever a workout routine that incorporates abs, it's not the sort of thing that's ever going to lend you to have this visual cue of the kind of guy you're not going to be messed with. That's always covered up. Even in the summertime, that's going to be covered up. And even if it's not covered up, it's not like your likelihood of looking more intimidating, abs will not contribute to that. So any man who works out and truly devotes a lot, and you have to devote more than any other thing you work out on. I think abs are the hardest things to really hone. That is the biggest evidence of the vagina brain man. It's the man who's got abs. It has no non-gynocentric benefit. Whatever benefit you have from having abs, there's no health benefits, there's nothing. I mean, a flat stomach, you want to preserve that, fair enough. Walking around with a gut is not exactly pleasant. For you, buy a different pair of pants, you're gonna have to deal with, well, yeah, just less fitting clothes, right? So there's also, just like there's a difference in terms of self-defense, being bigger makes you, visually speaking, less likely to be targeted. And likewise, having a flat stomach, as distinct from having abs, having a flat stomach is advantageous on non-gynocentric grounds. For your, it's prudential, simply because walking around with a flat stomach or maybe a small gut is going to make your just day-to-day movement more pleasant. But going from there and putting in the amount of effort, and this really is why I'm going to use the word vagina-brained. It has no non-gynocentric benefits, and it is the most difficult thing to get and maintain. And here I'm just talking six-pack, I'm not even taking it to the eight-pack. And why? It is a sign from a woman who demands it. It's like, I don't mind using the word demon to describe one such woman. Because at least if a woman demands certain other things that align with stuff that may be to a man's advantage beyond the bedroom fun, fair enough. At least she's kind of getting him to look bigger and then maybe have these other offshoot benefits. But when she demands the abs, it's always going to be covered up when he's not having the bedroom fun. And even if it weren't, abs are not intimidating. A better musculature, a larger frame, that can lend itself to these benefits that I just glossed. There's other benefits as well, but these are kind of the ones that should be at the forefront of your mind if you're if you're out and about in the middle of the night often enough, and there's a lot of, you know, cart pushing bums or worse giving you the stink eye. But yeah, in terms of abs, there's just no tangible benefit. It is all purely to conform yourself to whatever it is that they want or that they demand. This can be a preference or a standard, right? So standards and preferences, different things. More and more women in the West, they're making this their standard because they can get it, because they're spoiled for choice. And that's perfectly fine. That's good that they're announcing that sort of thing, because it's a good thing as in terms of a red flag. Avoid at all costs. And the reason this is really sad is because the type of man who has abs, I've not seen any exceptions to the contrary. The type of man who has abs has everything else going on as well. So it really is the sort of man who lives in the gym, effectively. You can't get that and sustain it with the whole package as well, unless you just sacrifice that much time in the gym, and you have no reason to do that. You have reason to devote some amount of time. Like I pop into the gym at work. My workplace has a gym, and I pop in there during my coffee breaks, and I'll do either high rep, lower weight, or lower weight but insane number of reps. But I'm in there. If I'm in there for 10 minutes, over 10 minutes, then it's not just a coffee run. Then it's one of these highly anomalous lunch break workouts. But if I'm in there, it is like 99% of the time, it's during my coffee break. I just pop in and I'm out before 10 minutes, a set or two. And that's just, again, to keep up appearances, because I know that the crime's really spiking a lot here, and it's there's reason, especially with age, you just kind of dry up even more. So there's these tangible benefits to it. Some people talk about health benefits in and of themselves. I'm kind of agnostic on that. I think merely staying fit, like through jogging, is good enough. But people say even workouts make you more healthy. Fair enough. I don't think having abs as opposed to a flat stomach makes you more healthy. But men put in the effort, and on top of it, it's not just like, okay, I'm going to work out on my abs. It's going to take a lot of strenuous activity and a lot of my own personal time. So I'm not going to do anything else when I'm in the gym. I'm just going to fixate on abs. No, no, no. Every single time a man has abs, he's got everything else going on. And the cost of that is he's not going to have much going on above the neck. But it's just that important for certain men to be the it factor from a gynocentric standpoint. If Jordan Peterson truly were the savior of men, he would make these sorts of noises. Maybe even once in a while. It doesn't have to be at the forefront of his gender agenda, but just every once in a while. He would use terms that Black Mind uses. These are the very type of men who should be referred to as gynocentric goons and matriarchal mandingos. This is a good kind of terminology that gets bounced around, usually the Black Manosphere. That's why I like the Black Manosphere more than the generic non-racialized manospheres. They've got some good rhetoric. I've got a lot of rhetoric of my own that I'd like to see spread as well, but that's neither here nor there. So yeah, that's just to kind of qualify my gym cell condemnations from the last videos. Like, you can have valid reasons to work out, but there are a lot of vagina-brained men who maybe they don't even think about all these offshoot benefits, and they would work out the way they work out for their abs. That's exactly what's going on through their minds when they're working on any other body part. It's just to please women. Once you're in a relationship and you know that she's not one of these known quantities, then I'd go easy on you once she's proven herself worthy of that kind of effort, if she in fact likes that. But if you're doing that just to get your body count up, and she is not putting in anything nearly proportional to what you're putting in, and that's just the way the market is, and that's just something you turn your mind off on and accept, the sexual market, that is, you have had Big Chivalry do a number on you. And that's what the third video is going to be. I'm just gonna go off on Big Chivalry, right? We got big government, big pharma, big tech, big banks, various other big things that the internet's always, one or another corner of the internet's telling you to be on the lookout for. Well, I'm telling you to be on the lookout for Big Chivalry and the kind of rewiring of your brain and the kind of detriment to male psychological health that Big Chivalry will do on you. There's no way you buy into it, and sadly, when a good number of guys, when they're raised on it, they can't step out of it. It just takes that much of a stranglehold. But I believe it's a huge detriment to it's not necessarily a detriment to female psychological health, because what does chivalry do? Well, chivalry says that there's two gendered paths. You're born to them, so it's not something you can control, but there's one gender path in the form of girlhood and womanhood, and that lends itself to lordship. And there's this other gendered path that has to do with boyhood and manhood, and that lends itself to serfdom. So men think of themselves, they don't use these terms, but this is effectively, if you buy into Big Chivalry, if you play along, you don't even have to believe it. If you think it's dumb, but you're willing to act it out in the world, you still on some level have bought into the idea of yourself as a gender serf, and of all the women you want to bet as these gender lords that dictate your faith and that you essentially bow to. And that's not healthy for your, in numerous ways. That's anything but healthy. And it's always a race to the bottom. And the red pillars, what they'll tell you is that some of them may even admit that it's a race to the bottom. But the red pill advice is the sort of thing that says, in this race to the bottom, we're going to give you tips and advice for how you can, for as long as humanly possible, on this race to the bottom, you can find yourself outside of the bottomless pit. But at the end of the day, you'll be in the bottomless pit as well, because it's not a race to the bottom that's going to change, and it's not going to change precisely because of people like us. It's going to make a lot of analogies to like cutthroat labor markets, and where there's no kind of regulatory state that's on the horizon that's going to relax things. And in the sexual and romantic and marital context, there shouldn't be, because the only thing that's rational to do is to not participate. Because unlike in the labor market, you're not going to starve to death by not participating, by not working. But yeah, the red pillars, most of them won't even tell, most of them won't even admit that what they're partaking in is a contribution to this thing called race to the bottom. The few of them who might be honest will tell you that yeah, it's a race to the bottom, but you taking my advice will help you stave off the bottomless pit for as long as humanly possible, if you do it right. But of course, the other way to find yourself outside of the bottomless pit is to not participate. And men who pour an incredible amount of effort, an ungodly amount of effort to not just get their abs, but to then just maintain their abs on top of all the other things in terms of the it factor physique. Like how can you call them anything other than vagina-brained men? And just completely buying into Big Chivalry's framing of yourself as a gendered agent. Big Chivalry wants you thinking of yourself as a gendered serf, on earth to impress and even impregnate, sadly, your gendered lordship. It's not healthy. So that's one of the tangents that I need to go into in the third installment of the trilogy. But for now, I'm just going to read out these few bullet points that I've written down. And each of these is a theme. And I don't know if I need to start making, instead of just 3 really long videos, I'm thinking maybe I'll do shorter videos. I really hate it. The reason I hate it, I explained a couple of times. I want to feel like I'm swatting flies, because a lot of these antagonists are not worthy antagonists, and if I'm dealing with an unworthy antagonist, I just like doing it in long videos where it seems like I'm just at one thing after another and I'm just swatting flies, because they are flies. They're mental flies. But here's a few things. I just jotted this down. I'm just going to read it out, and then you guys can tell me if you think this is worthy or unworthy to do as a, like, if it's worthy, then it may be worthy for a short video that's maybe 20 minutes long, as opposed to like multi-hour videos, part of the trilogy. So, nerd as a slur, anti-Semitic undertones. See, gets back into the issue. Nerd is very much a male-only slur. I know it's been adopted the way like queers adopt queer, to think that, you know, we're now owning the term, but the fact, hang on to the Bible Belt, a lot of people still use queer in the derogatory way it's always been used, and likewise a lot of people still use nerd in the derogatory way it's always been used. So it's a male-only slur, and it's not something that intersectionality, like if you're knee-deep into intersectionality, you're never gonna, like, you're gonna worry about all these other slurs, but you're gonna conveniently ignore and maybe giddily partake in the fact that this is just arbitrarily not included within your group status protection cabal. It's very clawy arguments. A lot of these intersectionality arguments are very clawy arguments. And I'm not saying we shouldn't use a slur like nerd, or worse slurs, dork, geek. These should all be, if we have a healthy, open culture and a healthy, open society, these should very much be on the table. But let's understand, if these are on the table, all other slurs ought to be on the table as well, because if it's not, then it's completely arbitrary. And they think they have arguments against that, but they don't. You watch my last video, you'll be given all the reasons as to why they don't. I don't want to relitigate all that as well. It's arbitrary. And it's so bad that I can't even mouth these other slurs in this video in a expository context without worrying about being taken down as a result of it. Some slurs are fair game, some slurs are not. No, go fuck yourself. Okay, so sex ed omissions. So I need to, this one I'm definitely going to do as a, maybe not even part of the trilogy, but still a part of a long enough video, because there's so much that gets left out in sex education that would be beneficial to boys. Stuff like Juggernaut Law, stuff like the backup man, which you can easily study if you ask people about their sexual histories. You ask all these, especially all these guys who emigrate out of the East into the West. Once they get their diplomas, this is why the term stem cells is a specific subtype of incels. It's usually for these guys who are not born and raised in the West, but who end up coming to the West to try really hard, and they so have the wool pulled over their eyes that they think once they're properly educated and once they're earning enough money, the kind of woman that finally accepts them, like they think they've struck it big. But they had nothing but misery throughout their 20s, and in some cases even more. God, it's really bad for Indian and Chinese guys. Like this is the racism that we all need to put a magnifying glass on. The kind of socio-sexual racism that just a lot of guys who are not who are non-whites living in the West. Anyway, back to the sex ed theme. So the instructor, they brought in a special instructor in our case instead of the normal teacher, but essentially it's a bunch of 12-year-old kids in a classroom context. Now sex is being discussed, the birds and the bees is being discussed, and so obviously everyone gets giggly and everyone gets chatty, and so one too many times that special instructor told us all to pipe down because, hey, this is going to be useful to all of you, right? And so I wish I had asked this question in a serious tone. I'm pretty sure my tone was goofy sounding. I meant it as an earnest question. I meant it as an earnest question, but I immediately replied and I asked, well, how do you know it's going to be useful to everyone? Like, what if some people are too hideously grotesque to ever have sexual relations, right? And everyone laughed because I think my tone really was that goofy, but I meant to ask that as a legitimate question. And certainly the instructor didn't take me seriously. And so this is one thing that I think that has been underutilized, or just I've never seen it utilized, but when they go off on the incels for their entitlement, they always present it as like the individual has just spun certain notions into their head that make them think that they're entitled to intimacy and sex. And so I just started thinking about these examples. There were other examples during sex ed and in many other classroom contexts even, where it's like you pose what is the real thing. Even at 12, I guess I was cynical enough even at 12 to ask this question. It's like, well, what if some people, like, you just said we should all pipe down because this is going to be useful for all of us. So it's like, how do you know that? How do you know that some people aren't going to be hideous? I forgot what examples I used, but I used some, whoever was in the kind of the pop culture, the jokes on you figures of the day. I cited them as an example, and just the instructor didn't take me seriously, the class didn't take me seriously. Part of it is my fault. I should have put on a more serious tone, but no one answered the question. And the reason it's relevant, and the reason I'm going to go off on far more things about sex ed that they don't teach that would be very advantageous to boys, namely juggernaut law, but again, it's this thing where they just refuse to, like this graph right here. I'm going to insert this graph. I inserted it in the last video. Like, they're cowards. They're cowards for not making this part of the curriculum. Because it's very much about sex, and it's very much about choosiness that underpins sexual dynamics. And so, okay, there's the dry story about the birds and the bees, but we have so much data now, and I asked my dad's, my half-brothers, my dad's twins with his second wife. They're mid to late teens. Have you guys, like, what exactly did you guys learn in sex ed? And it wasn't any of this stuff. It wasn't any of the other statistically interesting things that all these promiscuous cultures have now unveiled that I think is very much useful to young boys to know. But all the cowards that are in control will not touch any of these things with because they want, I think they want young boys completely oblivious to juggernaut law, because if you're oblivious to these sorts of things, you're more likely to feel bad about yourself and to be willing to accept bad deals later on. Because you are truly going to think that it's just something about you, that you deserve the bad deal. So they want guys tight-lipped about their own lack of experience. They want guys not asking questions, not thinking critically about they want you thinking critically about how cutthroat the labor market is and all these other kinds of things, but not how cutthroat for guys in the West, especially the dating market and various other kinds of markets are that have to do with human sexuality. And so if sex ed is not going to touch any of that, then what is it good for? All right, it's good for keeping it easy for women to have their hoe phase and then have the backup man, the gullible backup man who doesn't even see what kind of pathetic hits he's taking, just like these guys who, in a lot of cases, Indian and Chinese guys who slave away educationally and professionally so that they can feel themselves worthy of whether it's a trad wife or a non-trad wife who's had her hoe phase. Because they get you believing that, at least from the belt down, you have negative value. and the chicks you chase are the only way that you can get from that negative value status. If you insert your penis into them, then you can maybe scrounge off on some positive value onto yourself from them because they have the golden vagina. I'd like to believe that I'm wrong about all this, and if I just went to one or another school board and I pointed out how some of these things should be taught, I wouldn't essentially get kicked out or unceremoniously booted. But I'm cynical. I'm too cynical to even try that. Hell, I'd probably get a lawsuit slapped on me. So yeah, that's sex ed. There's a lot more to be said about sex ed and sex ed's omissions that are working in tandem with gynocentric interests and against any honest-to-God based telling of the story. There's a lot more to be said about that, and I'll say it either within the gender trilogy or at some point later. If duck-face selfies in public fall short of vainglorious behavior, then nothing is worthy of vainglorious, the term, and we might as well retire the word. That's kind of self-explanatory. That's just with some of these, there was an article, I'll try to retrace my steps and then flash the heading of it. It was New York Post. I don't know why New York Post, of all the partisan rags that you might expect to cover this sort of thing, it was the New York Post. They gave glowing coverage to this chick who was like, I'm a Marilyn Monroe lookalike and people hate me for my beauty. Like, she actually mouthed that and she let that be the heading for the article. Remember the second time South Park took the piss out of Kanye West? It was in late 2013. It was the season finale for one of their seasons. And it was both Kanye and Asswoman in that episode taking the piss out of them. But the point is, Wendy, Stan's little girlfriend, she was dissatisfied with how many of her little classmate girls were doing this duck face thing, were doing this modification of their own bodies to gain social media clout. And she raised this to numerous people, obviously her little friends that she raised it to, they said, well, Wendy, you're just gel. You're just gel. She took it to the school counselor, Mr. Mackey. That's pretty much his feedback as well. You're just gel. She even went on a news show and the newscaster guy said, well, he said what everyone else told her, you're just gel. So it was all understood to be a joke. It's how pathetically myopic people are and unequipped to deal with what is truly a valid criticism of this kind of vainglorious behavior. And instead, it was all just an attack on poor Wendy, character assassination, pretending they know things about her that they don't, and the joke was on them. But the climate right now, that episode's from 2013, just 9 years ago. But the climate right now, it's like this, like, of course at the end of this article, she's like, I think it's also a matter of jealousy. Of course, we don't see any of this hostile, negative feedback that she's getting. But it really is that, I don't know where this originates from, but it was initially just meant to be a joke. It was the, don't hate me because I'm beautiful. But we're at a point now where the irony is just completely lost on that. Like, these women who get sent home, there was another article I'll flash, there was an OnlyFans model who taught a kindergarten class or some really first or second grade. She was teaching young kids, and she was showing up to school in these provocative outfits. And then these other news outlets pick up her story and give her glowing coverage. But then at some point in the article, she just puts that a little in there. She said, I think it's also a matter of jealousy. It's like, bitch, you need to watch that South Park episode. Like, the joke is on you the moment you speculate about the worst possible things. You cannot even fathom that, no, maybe it is. You're just kind of looking whorish in a classroom and that looks inappropriate. But they have to sneak that in. So I'll just say, like, if these types of women, if it cannot be said of them that this is vainglorious behavior, then we might as well just retire the word. So I'll do a fleshed out version of that later, but now I'm just throwing out these to see which ones you guys think would be good as a standalone video. Exposing red pill. Oh yeah, so I want to do just as Schopenhauer had in he had that chapter called Psychological Observations, And it was just one thing after another. The things didn't really connect, but really flowed well. I kind of want to do something like that. I just want to do short statements, but I want to call it psychosexual observations. And here's one. When concerns over SMV govern a man's conduct, he has not stopped pedestalizing women in the deep sense, no matter his red-pilled rhetoric and protestations to the contrary. The more intertwined his conduct is with these concerns, the less viability his psyche is, I should have written has, the less viability his psyche has or shows promise of for abandoning Big Chivalry. You are, in effect, as a red pillar, you are the male equivalent of the trifling woman who spends hours in front of the mirror doing her hair and makeup. That's what you are. If you're the sort of guy who's ever tried to learn game or any of these things adjacent to game, you are the flip side, the gendered flip side of the... And I don't even know why any woman would announce this, but they're so removed from any sense that they just announce the fact that they spend hours in front of the makeup doing their hair and an hour in front of the mirror doing their hair and makeup. Woman beaters aren't necessarily cowards. The people who insist otherwise are predisposed to just world clownery. See, I called it clownery there. That's the better word for it. Bill Maher was eaten alive for being rational on this and linguistically coherent. Yeah, so in 2001, a couple of weeks after 9/11, said, say what you want about these people who flew these planes into the building. One thing we cannot say about them is that they are cowards. This sort of thing takes balls. This is why he lost his show Politically Incorrect and ended up having to go to HBO. They canceled him over this. But what he said makes perfect sense. But I think that we see this in many other contexts. It doesn't have to be terrorism, but certainly anytime a guy beats his wife or beats his girlfriend, we say coward. You're just not using words correctly. But so there's so much ovarian protectionism in this world, not just this society, but in this world, is people will be willing to use words inconsistently just because we need to stain him. Like, you can stain his character in many ways. You can call him depraved, you can call him a great number of things, great number of negative things. It's not necessarily the case that he's also a coward if he does these things. But there's so much ovarian protectionism that we need to slap the word coward on them as well. It's like there's no limit to the amount of irrationality that people will be blinkered on if it's conducive to big chivalry. I'll skip that. Good shorthand for mind-will tussle. Okay, so there's the mind-will tussle, and I think increasingly with what I'm going to do with this channel is I'm just going to be a kind of armchair drill sergeant with this thing. Like, I'm just going to be on everyone's ass when they're giving in to the will too much and not being guided by the mind anywhere near as enough as I think they should be. I'm just going to swoop in and just do the commentary and just phrase it in these sorts of ways. There's no better way. Because, you know, I often thought of myself as someone who is not conscientious, because conscientiousness is very much associated with industriousness and what are some of the other things? Orderliness. So I'm not an orderly person, and the way conscientiousness gets cashed out, it's usually in terms of industriousness and orderliness. So it's like, I guess I'm not conscientious, but I so totally am. I'm just not conscientious as it pertains to practical endeavors. When it comes to abstract concerns and abstract explorations, that can be considered conscientious, and I'm all about that. And so this is a big strike against psychology, is they don't partition conscientiousness into how energized you are over practical domains of life and how energized you are over just exploring these abstract dimensions. I would score very high on conscientiousness if measured by how attentive I am for timeless abstract questions. But then I write, on the heels of that, I write as a theme for either the final part of the gender trilogy or for a standalone video. This is how a good way to sniff out who is way more driven by the mind than they are by their will, or sorry, by their will than they are by their mind. The degree to which an agent is personally ambitious and thus impersonally unambitious, that degree corresponds to and reveals how dominant the will is over his mind. When an agent's ambitions are more impersonal on the whole, his mind has taken control, at least for the moment. This explains how, contrary to what is normally assumed, agents governed by the mind will not find it easy to coast through life in emotionless ways, though some undoubtedly do, as can be seen with some policy wonks. Okay, so then I wrote this I kind of want to do a sketch where there's all these empowerment movements, from like queer theory to disability theory. There's all these people. It's like we need to take what's been maligned and derogated in society and turn it into an empowerment movement for feeling good about ourselves. So I kind of sketch out I give like a brief overview of a sketch that I should do as a standalone video. This absolutely will be a standalone video. I want to call it Narcissistic Empowerment Movements. Like, us narcissists have been so maligned for so long, why can't people see that we're awesome? I know, we'll form a political movement out of it so that we can actually get glowing coverage. Although, if you look around, enough narcissists get enough glowing coverage as it is. But the moment you make it explicit about them being narcissists, that's when the pushback will kick in. So here, the sketch will work because the narcissism, the word is going to be explicit there as a label. It's like, we're here, we're narcissists, get used to it. Something like that. I can make it work. I know I can make it work. There's a lot of other sketches that I have ideas for. This is kind of just at the top of the list. Okay, so now this is just some stuff that have nothing to do with gender. Moscow Mitch. If you've ever called Mitch McConnell Moscow Mitch, like, you're just deep into proggy conspiracy land. Especially after he went to Finland and Sweden to assure him that America supports their entry into NATO. Like, Mitch McConnell traveled. He didn't just give like a little talk that was recorded so that he can get played in Sweden and Finland. He in this ambassador-like condition, in this very much diplomat-like condition, he flew to the countries to reassure their ambassadors and diplomats and heads of state that America fully backs up their entry into NATO. But you look at the last 4 or 5 years, it's like the term Moscow Mitch has been used so many times by usually MSNBC and in some cases CNN and a few other mainstream outlets. It's so absurd that, like, the next time someone refers to Moscow Mitch in this sort of way, just understand you're dealing with a conspiracy theorist as bad or almost as bad as a sort of QAnon conspiracy theorist. Mitch McConnell should have never been called Moscow Mitch. No, he worked alongside the MAGA movement because he wanted to see certain things implemented. And he got certain things in the form of the tax cut and the federal judges. That's as far as it went. It doesn't mean he's Moscow Mitch. He's a Russian agent, for Pete's sakes. Let's see. Scott Alexander's depression. Yeah, so Scott Alexander is my favorite blogger, and he has been impacted by all these issues that I'm raising in terms of the kind of gynocentric lens ruling the roost. It's really bad where he grew up in Silicon Valley, the Bay Area. He's written about this at length, and I want to kind of draw from his posts because this is, I think, objectively speaking, Scott Alexander is the best blogger, by far, the best blogger of all time. And yet a brilliant person like that can be driven to the point of suicidality because of these gynocentrists and their matriarchal mendingos and gynocratic goons. I like these terms. It's just like, it's so clear that the media hit piece on the incelosphere just completely gets it wrong. If someone is brilliant as Scott Alexander was effectively within the incelosphere, he has not been ever since his blog blew up, but he wrote these couple of posts in 2014, 2015 talking about how chronically and suicidally depressed he was over these things. And yeah, it's all but forgotten about, but I think I'm going to revive some of that and read some of the stuff that he's written about. It's like, Scott Alexander should have learned some social skills. Scott Alexander should have learned some things about the world. No. Read some of his posts. This is not the sort of guy who needed to do anything to change himself. This guy is not just an epistemic saint. This guy is a kind of moral saint as well. Because the kind of feedback he got from truly awful people, he still treated them with a modicum of respect and even grace. It's like, Scott, you're way too nice. Let's see what else. Beavis and Butthead should have been a show about two chicks. Okay, so this is another kind of skit that I want to do at some point. I want to essentially, right around the time Beavis and Butthead came out, that's kind of when women took a downturn, and it would have been so much better if the show had been about just these two chicks that are as dumb as Beavis and Butthead was, or have a kind of flip side. So one episode can be about Beavis and Butthead, the next episode can be about like the gendered flip side of them. Who bluffs on truth? Memories Revealer 3000. That I can't even begin to paraphrase here. But it has to do with kind of if there was a device that could reveal all our memories and thus display every single lie that all of us has ever told and make it so that it's out there in the world. Like, would you think that it would be good for that sort of device to be innovated? And so that no one has anything in the way of any skeletons in the closet. And we could just reveal how much lies have been told for, let's say, everyone who's alive right now. As much as I treasure privacy, I believe the lies are why the low resolution people stay low resolution and the high resolution people thrive. Sorry, the low resolution people, in terms of their world views being low resolution, they thrive, and the high resolution people don't thrive. Is because the low resolution ones, they just lie often. And so I'm at a point now where it's like, yeah, if there was such a thing as Memories Revealer 3000, I'd sign off on it. I'd sign off on it. It would be very cringy. There'd be a lot of uncomfortable scenarios now that we would all know each other's lies, but I think the person who would, at the end of the day, say no, it'd be too much, is very much the sort of person who's probably just lies way too much, lies for a living. Frameworks presenting men as doing badly in particular, even though stats show teen girls and women in their 20s and to an extent in their 30s doing worse in terms of depression and reporting persistent feelings of hopelessness and suicidality. Yeah, so that's a blog post I did on, there's another idiot who did a Joker video. I forgot the YouTuber's name, but the video is titled "The Joker Tried to Warn You," and he's essentially buying into this idea that like men, and especially young men, are doing worse because they've been rejected by society. I'll read out the whole post because I was pretty on fire there. I incorporated the will and the mind as a framing device because obviously the YouTuber didn't. But you see, the moment you incorporate the will and the mind as a framing device, like his commentary just rings hollow. But also, he just totally ignores the fact that statistically it's not at all clear. And if anything, to the contrary, it is clear that at least women, teenage girls, women in their 20s, and to a lesser extent in their 30s, all things considered, are doing worse than men internally. They may be doing better socially and professionally and educationally, but internally, and thus on the whole, they're doing worse in terms of just bad feels. It's true, young men are doing worse socially, but that's not everything. And so that video is just like, oh, the Joker tried to warn you about the excluded man, and you guys didn't listen. It's like, it's not at all, and it's not at all clear that we should have any amount of sympathy for all these loners where there's truly that many of them. Right? If there's truly that many loners, and if like the movie Joker is supposed to get us to think critically about that, it's like, well, why aren't all these loners hanging out with each other? Right? It's like, oh, we're supposed to feel bad for them. They've been neglected from mainstream society. It's like, and you're talking about just how many of them are. I think in that video, the Joker tried to warn you. He cited some stats about how like 30% of men, or men 30 and below, don't have anything in the way of a social circle. He quoted statistics about men 30 and below, like adult male virginity being higher, and adult male friendlessness being higher for like these younger men. It's like they can network with each other if there truly is that many of them who are cast out by society, but they don't. So this framing effect of his, where it's like, they want to hang out with the mainstream crowd, but the mainstream crowd is shunning them. It's like, well, why don't they hang out with each other? Probably because there's something else going on here. Probably because it's not just a failed joiner phenomenon. It's not the MSTOW phenomenon. It truly is the MGTOW phenomenon that's more explanatory. Or else, if it truly were a matter of just a bunch of failed joiners, in that high droves, they'd be able to network with each other sooner or later, and then they would do the, whatever, the kind of revenge of the nerd crap that I had to do book reports on way back in the day. Okay, I've got more stuff here, but how long has this been going on for? Yeah, this is going on for a while, so I think I'm going to cut it short and just watch it. But yeah, those are some of the kind of things that I just don't know whether I want to make really long videos and incorporate them, or just do shorter videos and flesh out each of these things in a proper manner from here on out. So feedback is welcome. I will do an interlude video where I'll just kind of gloss these themes, but in a quicker way, because then I'll get more feedback, because it'll be a shorter video, whereas this is well over an hour in. So I know that it's only the people who've got the kind of attention span that I respect who will have heard all these things this late in the video. But yeah, I think this will be it, and I might read from that community post where I take that guy who did the stupid video. Oh, the Joker tried to warn you. Because I just put him on blast in my comment on the video that I couldn't see, right? So often what happens is I leave these long comments on videos and then I can't see them, so I can't see them when I sign out of my YouTube channel. So then I just put them on, I just copy and paste it into the community tab. So I'll do that now.